right, great. I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Collette Spagnolo. I'm VP of Marketing Analytics globally here at DoubleVerify, and I'm dialing in from New York. So it is great to be here today. Good morning. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to our 2022 Global Insights Report webinar. In case you're not familiar, DV's mission is to make digital advertising stronger, safer, and more secure. And transparency and thought leadership are both critical to this mission, and that's why we're all here today. DV's Global Insights Report is an annual report that provides advertisers with an in-depth market-by-market analysis spanning APAC, EMEA, LATAM, and North America to help inform digital advertising strategies. This is actually our 5th anniversary of the Global Insights Report, and our findings have become more robust each year. This year, our very talented analytics team looked at media quality and performance trends for over 1 trillion impressions delivered in 80 markets and across more than 2,100 brands. When I first started working on this report in 2017, the verification market was still nascent. And in the beginning, verification primarily focused on protection after transactions took place through blocking and monitoring services. As programmatic evolved and became the primary buy type globally, our industry's focus turned to protecting advertisers before media transactions even take place. And this is commonly referred to as pre-bid avoidance. As this shift occurred, our advertisers have reaped the benefits of these advances in technology, which has improved protections for them over time, and that's improved their performance over the years as well. Another shift that we've seen at a global level is that fraud was one of the biggest concerns in 2017. And while it is still a focus, today we hear from advertisers that they are most concerned about brand safety and suitability and how to measure performance in a cookieless world. This is especially true for our longest standing customers who already have a strong baseline of quality. And a trend you'll see throughout our discussion today is that these advanced advertisers have influence on our trends, on our insights, and of course, our benchmarks. And they know how important it is to make the most of their digital investments. Today's focus is, of course, on the APAC regions. This covers more than 150 brands in 15 countries. And I think overall, APAC is coming into its own in terms of verification, catching up with the more mature regions globally. That said, APAC, of course, has unique concerns across multiple markets, and we will address those throughout this conversation. So I'll be taking us through the findings from the report with specific insights from the APAC regions. As we dive into each topic, I'll open up the discussion with our fireside chat panelists, Eileen, Alexis, and Jordan, to get their takes on the different trends. A little housekeeping for the audience. So you can ask questions in the Zoom Q&A box throughout the session. We'll keep tabs on those. And at the end, we do have some time set aside for us to review those questions and get the answers from the panelists as well. We'll also be launching some polls throughout the fireside chat, and we'll be reviewing those results live. So please, as an audience member, participate in those polls so that we have some interesting things to talk about. Before we get into all of that, though, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. So Eileen, Alexis, and Jordan, can you guys each introduce yourself and tell us where in the world you are zooming in from? We'll start with you, Eileen.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Eileen Ooi. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Omnicom Media Group Malaysia. I lead a team of talented individuals. We're very focused on driving transformational growth for marketers, as well as really supercharging our solutions in the future focused tech, measurement, as well as media era today. Along with that, I'm actually also the Vice President of Malaysia Digital Association. And I'm so excited to be here. And then it's an honor to be discussing such a pertinent topic as, you know, APAC continues to supercharge a digital transformation. So happy and lovely seeing everyone here. Looking forward to have the discussion.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Eileen. So I'm a director at Matterkind in Hong Kong. So what do? We enable meaningful brand connections through an audience-first approach across channels. So we drive more efficient and effective business outcomes. I have over 10 years of digital experience across search, social, and programmatic media. And my kind of responsibility in Hong Kong is to make sure that we are delivering the most innovative and best-in-class addressable media campaigns for our clients. I help streamline processes and drive efficiencies across the company, as well as providing training and education to internal teams and clients.
Thanks, Alexis. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jordan. I'm the MD for APAC for DoubleVerify. So in my role, I obviously have been working with a lot of agencies and brands to drive greater trust and transparency across paid media investment, especially in the area of programmatic and social, right, where the significant portion of ad dollars has been going to. As DV in APAC has been active over the last couple of years, I'm personally excited and curious to see how the trends are playing out this year. So back to you, Collette.
Great, let's jump right in. So we're going to start at a pretty high level. More generally, when we take all of this together, looking at across fraud, brand suitability, overall, the number of years that a brand has worked with a verification provider typically leads to greater sophistication and better understanding of the value of verification tools. And this ultimately results in not only lower violation rates, but also greater campaign quality and, of course, efficiency. DV finds that long-standing verification users, or the advanced brands, are most likely to adopt a wider set of verification tools. So they're preventing things like fraud and brand suitability infractions before an ad is even served. And these advanced advertisers saw 9.4% post-bid violation rate in 2021, which is 6% below the global average, but I think more importantly, 28% below more recent adopters. So Eileen, we'll start with you. APAC's post-bid violation rate has dropped 6% year over year. And I think this is the first year we really feel like APAC's verification metrics have been closer to North America and EMEA. So I'd love to hear from you. How do you feel like advertisers have a more advanced verification strategy now in the region? And does it actually differ for regional versus global-based brands?
Thank you. So I think, Collette, the reality is data doesn't lie, right? And it's great to actually start to see APAC now moving along with the same momentum of our global markets as well. I think the reality is that, around this whole entire topic of safety, viewability, fraud, and all of that, there has been a growing interest. APAC advertisers are definitely growing in terms of their understanding and the importance of buying better quality inventories and protecting their brands from a long-term perspective. However, as you've actually just mentioned, this trend right now is still primarily driven by larger regional and global advertisers. The reality is APAC as a market is very unique across the region, across the markets and within each individual market. Let's say Malaysia in this case, for example, the spectrum of advertisers, between, I would say, the ones that are less advanced and that had really pivoted into the digital marketing space in the last 2 years due to the pandemic, and from the other end of the spectrum, advertisers who have been much far further down the funnel in its advancement and its understanding. So I think within the APAC region, typically local advertisers remain still the main challenge, and it requires quite a heavy education on the importance of verification and understanding that the impact to the business is not just rather short term from a cost perspective of adding on the layers of technology as a form of measurement, but really the sort of looking at the compensation of what actually is the longer term brand impact and its effect it has on the equities as well. So the reality is, I think as a region, there is still a lot of work to do. It's good that we're definitely moving in the right trajectory. But I think we definitely need to, come together to continue this education and to further enhance the ability to actually verification in this space.
Awesome. Alexis, on your side, are you seeing more universal acceptance, adoption, even just prioritization of verification in the region? And would love to hear specific to Hong Kong as well.
Yeah, well,
I just muted you. That was my fault.
Yeah, still getting used to these webinars, right? First off, I'd like to say that, no, I fully agree with everything Eileen said, that was like spot on. But in terms of acceptance, I mean, it really varies across the markets. You have very sophisticated and developed markets like Australia who apply, protection onto all of their campaigns. Well, maybe not all, but the vast majority. And then you have markets like Indonesia that are kind of more unsophisticated and are maybe only applying, the protection onto some of their campaigns or very few. And then you kind of had mid-tier sophisticated markets like maybe Singapore, Hong Kong, where maybe they're only applying, the protections available onto clients where it's required to do so. Generally, like Eileen said, the regional or global clients, whereas the local clients, people tend to kind of leave those on the sidelines. So yeah. Also, the general level of understanding across the markets from both on the agency side and the client side varies quite a lot.
Yeah,
so that's
definitely
also
does.
a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen that. Jordan, for those brands that are not embracing verification in APAC, do you have any advice for them? Maybe some best practices from the more advanced brands who have more experience, especially in the region?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the easiest starting point for any brands to really start investing in this space is on the programmatic side, right? So programmatic requires very little heavy lifting. So that will be the easiest point to really start. And obviously the next logical step is really investing, at verification on walled gardens, right? So, the most popular of them is because this is where the majority of the investments are going to. And it doesn't require a lot of heavy lifting from, internally and the agencies. So I would recommend them to start there. Obviously, ultimately, it's really to implement verification strategy overall across all the buying platforms. What we've seen a lot of brands have done is really develop and documenting, their own brand safety and suitability guidelines, including, a governance framework that they can actually disseminate across all the different markets, and then letting the local markets to sort of tweak it to suit the local market nuances, right? So if you think about in the region itself, I think one of the biggest concerns for the emerging markets especially is the eventual news cycle, right? The ongoing news cycle. If you look at recently, in Southeast Asia, there's been a couple of political and pretty sensitive news development in the region, and advertisers definitely want to ensure that their media investment is not being seen in a lot of this damaging news content and because based on our own research as well, that if advertising adjacent to the wrong content can not only impact the effectiveness of the advertising, but also the brand equity that the advertisers have been trying to build for a long time.
Awesome. Thank you all for getting into that. So let's dig into some of those specific metrics and practices that we all just alluded to. It's time, audience, for our first poll. So we're asking everyone in the audience to answer: how relevant is fraud for your brand? How much of a concern is ad fraud? And you'll see the Zoom poll should be popping up. There it is. We'll give everyone a beat to answer. And we'll leave this up for another minute or two, so feel free to continue answering. But as everyone's responding to that, Eileen, I'd love to know from your perspective, how big of a concern is fraud for the advertisers that you work with? What are you hearing?
I think overall, generally, all advertisers are very concerned about fraud, right? And typically, I think the word itself alludes to the fact that it is concerning. The depth of the understanding, I think, is where it starts to differ. So for more larger clients, such as our global advertisers, that it gets straight into operations, and there are protocols around it. In the way we buy our media, there are KPIs being set when we actually operate on those businesses. And there would be what I would say kind of like, I guess, penalties, I guess, from an agency perspective, if we don't deliver against the said clients' KPIs. At an Omnicom Media Group level as well, we do actually take fraud very seriously. So we protect our clients holistically. So like I earlier mentioned, right, the spectrum of the advertisers are very wide. So we do also have local advertisers who generally, if you ask them, hey, are you aware of ad fraud? Are you concerned about it? The answer will be yes. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to invest behind, protecting yourself, or let's adopting a third-party tool like a DoubleVerify to say, hey, let's include a pre-bid, a post-bid measurement, a verification, and then they'll start asking you, oh, how much does it cost? And what is the impact to the media budget, right? So in this regard, I think from an Omnicom Media Group perspective, we set certain boundaries already in place to ensure that we protect all our clients. So we have ensured that there are exclusion lists, there are a negative keyword targeting, there are specific minimum benchmark that we want to ensure from an ad fraud percentage perspective that we don't go anything more than actually 5%. From a brand safety perspective, we aim to actually get to 90%. And then we adjust some of these exclusion lists as well, dependent on the categories on that. To just at least ensure that I would say some of our more emerging advertisers who are concerned, but can't see past the cost, will at least be somewhat protected, and they are assured from an Omnicom Media Group perspective that there is some level of basic. But we are actively speaking to clients on the importance of actually shifting away from just cost efficiency measure, let's put it that way, right? Cheaper CPM, cheaper CPV. This doesn't protect ourselves from a brand safety or from a fraud perspective. And hence, actively kind of have that conversation. I think the biggest question always for some of these advertisers would be, what is the brand impact? So, what is the impact that I see from a business front? Do I sell less? Do I see that my brand equity gets tarnished? And I think these are the bigger questions that as an industry, we need to kind of look into as well and provide those data and findings.
Great. Alexis, on your side, and I'll try not to mute you this time. Do you feel like advertisers are more concerned with fraud in a programmatic environment? Would love to hear for your expertise on that side.
Yeah, well, as a company, Matterkind is obviously very concerned about fraud in the space, and we also do our utmost to prevent it from happening by applying fraud protection onto all of our campaigns. But I do think that in the region, in APAC, it's a bit less of a concern. Primarily, that is because the fraudsters tend to target the higher CPM markets, so the more developed markets like the US, because that's where they can make more money, right? They also tend to target new channels, emerging channels, where the protection is less developed, less sophisticated, such as connected TV. So there are some kind of differences between APAC and other markets. Also, if you look at the Credible Insights report, you can see that for APAC, the average fraud rate is 1%. Which is actually lower than the global rate of, I think it was 1.4, 1.5%. So the numbers are really very small. That doesn't mean it's not happening, like more than that, because that's just what's detected, right? It's like criminals in society. A portion of them get arrested and locked up, but there's another portion of them that are still out there in the wilds committing crimes, right? So it's a similar system, and it's just a kind of a cat and mouse game. And you're the good guys trying to like stop them from doing that and preventing that fraud. So that's kind of my take on it. And as an analogy, if you think about a car driving in the dark, so people like me and my team, we're in the driving seat. We have all the buttons, all the levers. We can switch the headlights on to help us see where we're going. DoubleVerify, right, is the headlights. They help us avoid the obstacles in the dark, avoid the potholes, avoid us from crashing. And actually the incremental cost of using fraud protection is so minimal that there's absolutely no reason not to switch it on. You should have your headlights on. So that's kind of my take on it. And as we should all kind of naturally opt in to fraud protection for all our campaigns. The more everyone opts in, the less financial incentive there is for fraudsters to carry on doing what they're doing. But should advertisers be concerned? I don't think so. It's like I said, it's 1%. It's not very big. Should they be aware of it? Absolutely. Should they be doing their best to prevent it? Absolutely. Yeah.
I love the car analogy, and yet I think we still have drivers who drive without their headlights or wear their seatbelt.
Just to save a few pennies for fuel, right? So it doesn't make sense. So you should absolutely have fraud protection on for your campaigns. And actually, some DSPs they offer it for free. There's absolutely no reason not to apply it.
Great. So I will share the poll results, and it's a great segue for our next section because Jordan is going to talk a little bit more about some of these trends that we're seeing. But although we're saying that, it's not as much of a concern in APAC, clearly, the audience is somewhat concerned or very concerned. But I think this makes sense, Eileen, back to what you originally said with this question, which is that, is it a concern? Yes. What am I going to do about it is a different question, right? So thanks for your insights there. So let's talk about the actual trends here for the violations. Global post-bid fraud violations did decline by 7% between 2020 and 2021. Although it might not seem like it, APAC actually did follow this trend. So although fraud rates did go up, this is all relative since APAC also, I think Alexis, as you noted, had the lowest post-bid fraud rate overall. These lower rates are due to, in part, pre-bid fraud detection and the speed at which DV's fraud lab targets and neutralizes emerging schemes. Remember, the trends that we're looking at are all based on our advertisers. They are for vigilant advertisers that are actively avoiding and mitigating against fraud, right? So while post-bid fraud declined globally from a rates perspective, this year actually saw a record in fraud schemes. They spiked by over 70% year over year from 2020 to 2021. An unprecedented number of schemes targeted CTV and video, exactly what you were just talking about, Alexis, and the most complex and sophisticated of which included DV-identified Octobot, Sneaky Terra, Viperbot, and Smokescreen. So hopefully one or two of those names are familiar to you from the press. So these schemes alone attempted to steal more than $6 to $8 million each month from advertisers, and they're costing publishers too. DV estimates that they may have siphoned $140 million US from publishers in 2021. So Jordan, these two trends kind of seem at odds, right, at first glance. So what protections specifically are in place that are keeping post-bid fraud rates down in APAC, despite all these fraud schemes still constantly popping up?
Thanks, Collette, for the question. I think the key protection that is specifically in place is the fact that my team is doing their job in the region, so that's great. Kudos to the team. But jokes aside, I think a lot of clients are really now investing heavily in pre-bid avoidance, right? So pre-bid targeting and pre-bid avoidance, and like what Alexis mentioned, like some of the SSPs and DSPs today have protection built in. Right, so in addition, brand can actually use pre-bid segments to ensure full coverage across site and ad fraud, malware, spoofing, and so forth. The other new area of application is what we call the pre-render solution. So these are the solution that provides an additional layer of protection that works in conjunction with existing controls such as blocking and pre-bid avoidance. So the solution actually enable advertisers to further reduce waste and minimize video infraction across devices, including CTV, mobile, and desktop. So video filtering can actually be used for campaigns that are executed directly via a publisher or through a DSP. It gets activated once an ad request is received and after bidding takes place. So yeah, this is some of the areas that advertisers can do today.
Thanks, Jordan. We touched on CTV a couple of times here. Eileen, what are you hearing from clients about fraud as it relates to newer platforms or devices like CTV? And then, of course, social and mobile are kind of first in APAC, but anything you're hearing specific to those devices or platforms?
I think as a practitioner in the industry, we're definitely seeing sort of with newer platforms and newer devices out there, there's definitely opportunities for fraud as well. So CTV is definitely one I would say probably less guarded in that sense. But I mean, coming back to your question in terms of what advertisers are saying right now is, I think while the awareness of fraud is there, I think moving into sort of getting into the platform area, which devices, the conversation hasn't been as mature based on what I've at least been seeing. Majority of the concern are still very much in the open web environment. There is now growing concerns, especially in social platforms. So, that's where we tend to see clients who are a little bit more advanced says, okay, how do we ensure that there are verification in place for us to measure, fraud within the social environment. But I think coming to CTV, that hasn't really been as pronounced yet. I think as the increased penetration of the device continue to grow, and in the last 2 years, it is pretty much massive, rapid adoption, right? I think give it another 2 or 3 years, I think that conversation is going to start to take more precedence now amongst advertisers.
Alexis, anything to add here?
Yeah, again, I fully agree with everything Eileen said. What I find particularly interesting to me is actually reading about these fraud schemes. So in the Global Insights report, I read it last night. There's a section on smoke screen, which is where fraudsters will display ads behind a wallpaper on a connected TV without the user actually viewing the ad or even knowing that there's an ad in the background. But DoubleVerify has actually helped uncover many of these other fraud schemes. Like you mentioned Octobot earlier, which spoofs domains and basically fires tracking pixels to make advertisers and platforms think that an ad was served when it really wasn't. So, really very interesting to find out about this. And, lately connected TV has taken a bit of the brunt of all these fraud schemes, but that's because it's been the easiest to target and has, like I mentioned earlier, the highest CPMs. So for fraudsters, that's the obvious choice, right? In terms of, back to your question about, the differences between devices, again, I don't think advertisers are too aware of the differences between them. So it's a bit more of an education piece, making sure that, they read things like the Global Insights report to kind of make sure they're aware of the differences in the benchmarks between those.
Great. Thank you for that. So shifting gears a little bit, we're going to talk through brand safety and suitability next. And we're going to launch our next audience poll, which is about how much of a concern is brand safety and suitability to your brand. So very similar to the last question, but about brand safety and suitability. So as everyone answers that, and again, we'll have this up for another minute or two, let's talk about what brand safety and suitability are. So in general, when we talk about brand safety and suitability, we're talking about different things, actually. So we're talking about brand safety as content that all brands would wish to avoid, should wish to avoid, and which should not be monetized by publishers. And brand suitability is more subjective, right? It's content that might be acceptable for some brands, but not for others. Brand suitability, being more subjective, depends more on the sensitivity for a particular brand, and even within the vertical itself, we can see quite differing points of view on what's suitable or not for a brand. So Alexis, I'd love to hear from you in terms of, are advertisers making this distinction, as I just described, between brand safety and suitability in APAC?
So most of us, the practitioners, we know and can distinguish between what brand safety is and what brand suitability is, right? But I think for our advertisers and clients, they don't distinguish the difference. So there's a kind of a lack of education piece around what the differences are. For example, I like to use the example of an alcohol brand. They don't want to appear on car websites because they don't want to associate themselves with drinking and driving, right? They also don't want to appear on kids content because they shouldn't be advertising to under 18s. Car websites, kids content, nothing wrong with it, right? Brand safe, absolutely fine, right? But an alcohol brand absolutely does not want to be on those websites because it's not suitable for the brand. So that's kind of the key difference. And I think using the example is always a very good way to help people understand what the difference is. But also, I think advertisers, because they don't really know the benchmarks, you can tell them, oh, your campaigns are running at 95% brand safe. They don't know if that's good or bad, right? So to them, it's just a number. So I think, again, helping have this report done every year helps set those benchmarks and set expectations about what is a good level of brand safety.
Awesome. Perfect segue yet again. So let's talk about what those benchmarks are and those violation trends. So the good news here is that our global post-bid brand suitability violation rate, like fraud, continues to fall and is now 9% lower than last year for an overall rate of 7.1%. Now, advertisers see brand suitability violation rates decrease as their verification strategy matures. And in APAC specifically, we've seen leaps and bounds. So brand suitability violations declined by more than 30% year over year. And that now they're below 7%, so actually below that global average. Jordan, can you talk about some of the tools in a mature brand safety and suitability toolkit? Like, what do I mean by that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest concern for brands here with in this space is really trying to take a big axe and slicing a big chunk of their reach via just applying inclusion and exclusion lists, which is what we tend to see in the beginner advertisers applying in this space. So I think with DV, we actually use more of a scalpel approach. So other than just applying inclusion exclusion lists, brand can also leverage. A lot of brands have been leveraging on our category avoidance, which we use apply semantic sciences, right? This is typically where we can actually direct clients to ensure dynamic protection that adapts with their evolving news cycle concern. You can also apply mobile app controls as well as keyword and language targeting, which is huge in APAC because mobile and local language is big in the region. So what we've also seen, giving a huge impact in the region from the stats perspective is we've seen a lot of brands applying our pre-bid authentic brand suitability targeting, right? So we actually give the advertisers greater sophistication and control.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we've actually been able to trace back that 30% drop in violations in APAC that I noted earlier. This happened after some of the top advertisers in the region specifically cleaned up their keyword list, their language list, and began using authentic brand suitability targeting. So that's again where the maturity of the region is really showing in the trends that we see. So I will share our poll results now. Very similar to fraud, actually. We're seeing everyone has 100% of respondents said that they are very concerned or somewhat concerned, and the vast majority say they're very concerned about brand safety and suitability. So very relevant to clients. Eileen, are you seeing that? What about your clients? Are you seeing them adopt some of those tools that Jordan's referencing?
Yeah, so I think very similarly, for global clients, definitely there are more robust conversations around the difference between just safety and suitability. There are a lot more sort of, I would say, adaptation in terms of how we would do it instead of just exactly like what Jordan would say, take the axe and just chop a whole list of inventories out the door. So I think that there is that discussion. However, I do also agree with Alexis that I think from a region perspective, other than the more advanced clients, a large majority of the region is very much primarily made up of local advertisers, big SME brands, or whether local brands that have emerged, especially in the last 2 years. We've actually seen huge local brands emerging now and growing and scaling up across the different markets. I think in this regard, the understanding of the differences, safety versus suitability, is still very, very nascent, in all honesty. I think this would, forget whether it's just safety or suitability, but I think just generally verification as an overall concept is still relatively nascent in that regard. So if I were kind of then put that in the view of where APAC is, that having made out of majority of the advertisers being local, brands or Southeast Asia region-based kind of brands, there's still a long way to go, I think, to really get into the areas of educating clients in the areas of, the differences as well. And likewise, to be honest, from an agency perspective, if we need to kind of tackle it at every single client perspective, that's a lot of work for us to actually think about. And that's where I think verification tools really kind of comes in handy in this regard.
Excellent. Thank you all for your thoughts on brand safety and suitability. Really interesting discussion there. So moving on a little bit to viewability as a topic. So we've seen more than 5 years of a trend of improvement in our viewable rates as benchmarks over time. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. In 2017, when we first launched this Global Insights report, it was already at that point in time, more than a decade after the industry as a whole was first introduced to this concept of viewability. And even a decade out, at the time, it was still just over 50% of ads were viewable. And today, video viewability is actually exceeding the recommended IAB threshold of 70%, and display is very close, right? Inching closer and closer. In APAC in particular, we saw a 17% increase in video viewability year over year overall, driven primarily by advances in Southeast Asia and Japan. At the same time, we did see Australia's video viewable rate decrease by 8%, but despite that, APAC still has the highest video viewability of any region in the world. So Eileen, with these industry-wide improvements over time, is the IAB's recommended threshold and definition as well, is this a high enough standard for viewability? I would love to hear what OMG recommends to your clients.
I mean, it's so great to see this trend. I think, you see the line moving up. I mean, I remembered having this conversation with Jordan, I think, years ago, and we were just trying to kind of talk about where as an industry, where viewability needs to move. Coming back to your question, I do think that it's great that IAB has actually reviewed their standards from, where it was before 50% to now we're 70%. But I think the reality is at an OMG level, we need to get to, our stand is, you got to get to 100%. I mean, let's just put in the analogy, like, years ago when we would think about TV ads, would you ever consider part of the TV ads to not be seen? I just think that that's kind of ridiculous. So why do we have a different standard when it comes to digital environment? And particularly for this region where video consumption is so heavy, it just seems bonkers in my head, right? If we would say that, yeah, it's okay, that 70% viewable. But the reality is, from a brand perspective, we produce these videos, we want the ads to be completely 100% viewable. And I believe that this would then also actually honestly link to our next conversation later on about attention, because that is how we actually anticipate and plan for marketing. The reality is, I think those fundamentals hasn't shifted. It's just the platform has. So for us, at least, in this regard, I think we are pushing for 100% viewability. We are also talking about the importance of looking at it from a guaranteed outcome. Coming back again, I think from an agency perspective, procurement guys are always pushing us to getting the rates down to the cheapest rate, go down for the cheapest CPVs. But what is the point if my cheapest CPV is showing on ads or channels that are not even visible, right, or viewable at all? Then this entire video is completely gone to waste. So for us, I think shifting away from really, again, I think the conversation about just being cheapest in what we're delivering to really saying, hey, we need to now start guaranteeing and delivering against 100% viewable impressions. I think that's kind of where our stand is.
Yeah, you also don't know what you don't measure, right? So the
Exactly.
application of verification and adoption is so important to even understanding that concept, right, for clients. So I think, that's an interesting angle. And
we're in a world that's very data oriented, but sometimes we look at data at a surface level.
Yes. Well, as VP of Marketing Analytics, I can tell you that I definitely can relate to that.
What Eileen said about the procurement teams is so true. That's why I laughed as well when she mentioned it.
Yeah. Yeah, so especially in APAC, I think when we're talking about viewability, it's also hard to separate the device themselves, that where the platform or the device that ads are actually showing up on. It's hard to separate that from the performance, right? And in APAC, this is no surprise. Of course, DV monitors relatively more ads on mobile than in other regions, and especially mobile app, right? 100% we understand and all know that already. But globally, we also see that mobile app, from a viewability perspective, outperforms mobile web by about 9 percentage points in display and 6 percentage points in video. It's very substantial, actually. But Alexis, even beyond this mobile versus desktop discussion, how do you think advertisers should be thinking about measurement of viewability on newer channels and platforms, right? Again, going back to you don't know what you don't measure, anything that you want to relate here to CTV or more nascent platforms or environments?
Yeah, well, obviously there are nuances in the measurement solutions between all the different devices and in the environments. When it comes to CTV, a few years ago, measurement of viewability for CTV was kind of very nascent, wasn't very well developed. But today it's in a very good place, and you absolutely can measure viewability across the newer channels. There are kind of even more newer channels like programmatic digital out of home, where you don't have any viewability measurement right now. So it's a constantly changing space. So it's always best to just try and keep on top of it. My opinion on viewability, going back to what Eileen said about trying to reach 100%, that's the ideal case. That's like the dream world. I don't think it'll ever be 100%. As you kind of edge closer and closer to 100%, it becomes incrementally harder to actually reach the 100. So it's just about kind of accepting how close you are within an acceptable range. Could be like plus 10 or minus 10% viewability across your campaigns against the benchmarks. Some will be higher, some campaigns will be higher, some will be lower. Not to worry, really, in my opinion, as long as it's an acceptable number.
Yeah, and then I mean, like Eileen was saying, right, the trading guarantees is the most important part of that, right? If you're never going to get to 100%, you can at least make sure that you're only paying for the viewable impressions, right?
Yeah. And to be honest, as long as you're monitoring it, you're measuring it, you're keeping an eye on it, you address the issues early on in the campaign if there are any. But ultimately, if you're an advertiser, your ultimate goal, right, is to drive business objectives, and that should be your primary concern. To me, as long as you're maintaining a good level of viewability, that comes kind of, kind of secondary, right? But as long as you're achieving your business outcomes, that's the most important, whilst delivering a good quality of media.
Right, that baseline of media quality, right? That the most advanced advertisers, we were saying, really rely on. So let's talk about some of those outcomes and also KPIs that can help us get there. Our next section is about attention, and I'm going to launch our final audience poll now to see what kinds of metrics our audience is actually using to optimize campaigns. So while everyone is answering that, and you can check multiple here, I'll kind of begin discussing attention. So viewability solutions have helped advertisers optimize towards placements, as we were just saying, that have a high likelihood of being seen. And those rates are important, but viewability only lets an advertiser know that a user had a chance to view their ad, and it doesn't measure that next level of impact that we were just discussing, right? Now that advertisers with a solid verification strategy, those advanced advertisers are hitting their high viewable rate goals. Now that that's happening, they can begin looking at new measures like attention to gauge performance and also drive outcomes. And now that there is a path to maintaining quality, the next natural purview of measurement is performance, right? Given the increasing scrutiny on privacy-friendly solutions, though, anything that's measured, I think we all can agree, must respect consumer privacy. And that's where contextual targeting and attention metrics will play a strong role in media planning moving forward. Now, beyond viewability, attention metrics can capture that elusive moment right? Where consumers are intrigued by a product or brand, they are motivated to engage. And ultimately, of course, our hope is that they're driven to convert. In a world where consumers see upwards of 10,000 ads per day, measuring attention can provide powerful insights into which ads are likely to perform. So Eileen, in your experience, what do brands and advertisers think attention means, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah, I actually find it quite ironic and actually interesting that attention's come back as a buzzword. I mean, I think when we think about back in the 1950s and the 1960s, when TV used to dominate the living room, it was an unspoken thing, but technically advertising was about attention. It was about a captured, immersive attention at that point in time. But obviously the world has changed. So I think that the reality is, while attention is the big buzzword now, and it's getting a lot of traction, a lot of attention from the advertisers, but the definition of attention has not been consistently defined at this juncture. I think there's a lot of school of thoughts around this area. Some sees attention as a form of 100% viewability in that sense, that's getting exposure and hence getting the attention. I think others are looking at it in a slightly more advanced way, where we kind of also looked at what is the engaged seconds of within that 100% viewable content as well. So for us, right now, attention measurement actually has been a key focus for us in the last 12 to 18 months. I think we've been talking about this very actively in the global arena as well. And within the APAC region, we are now embarking on research to also further understand the impact of attention to business, and also then what does it mean from a media landscape perspective across the different spectrums of whether it's the creative formats, whether it's the environment, whether it is also the different platforms and the channels as well. But I think that the importance here is, why is it important? It's because, like I said, right, attention it's always been the foundations of marketing. That is the purpose of marketing a brand. And I think in this day and age, when we now get swayed with various stuff, right, engagements or word of mouth and stuff like that, but that attention has always still been the foundation of marketing. And that is, I think, it's really, really important now for us to kind of understand, with the proliferation of so many different platforms, what does attention mean and how does it actually deliver against the brand? And especially, I think, in the world of media, how does that change our measurement of our metric? And one thing that we want to start looking for is, how do we measure cost per attentive seconds? Just like how we measure cost per impression. Now, how do we think about it from a more immersive way of measurement that is closer to actually brand impact?
Great. Jordan, on our side for DV, what's our perspective here? Can you add a little color?
Sure. So I think like what Eileen mentioned, attention is definitely getting a lot of attention from brands and agencies, especially this year, right? So and obviously with DV, our authentic attention solution is actually getting a lot of interest from brands and agencies. So with our authentic attention solution, what clients and agencies have found it to be interesting is the fact that we're actually evaluating over 50 data points, right, on each ad unit. So on the exposure of the digital ad and the consumer's engagement with the digital ad and device in real time across both display and video ads. So it's unlike a sample. We are not doing sample, we're doing actual measurement of every single ad, right? So, and we look at two core areas specifically in the area of exposure and engagement. So from an exposure standpoint, we obviously look at the measurement of the ad presentation, for example, metrics like viewable time, share of screen, quota completion, and from an engagement standpoint, we are really referring to measurement of the user interaction at the device or ad level. For example, whether you're engaging on the ad or device, or even video playback events. So when we combine all these different data points, what we're trying to do is really making it easy to understand how key campaign attributes across placement, sites, ad, and creative is compared across all DV impressions. And I think it's not just giving you insights, but also immediately providing optimization opportunities, right?
Great, and I will share these results because I think it really adds to your response there. So we're seeing that the majority of respondents actually selected multiple metrics here. The majority said time in view and quartile completions and ad interactions were actually being optimized on. So I think it's top of mind for the region. It's certainly top of mind for the audience here. And thank you for sharing. So Alexis, on that, are you hearing this as well? Are your clients focused on these kinds of metrics? And of course, from a Matterkind perspective, are you guys using metrics on the back end at least to help clients optimize?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically in Hong Kong, I'd say our advertisers are actually more concerned about the cost of media. So they're looking at CPMs and CPCs primarily, or even CPAs for performance clients. And actually, they're more concerned about the metrics that they can actually see themselves, such as on-site metrics like bounce rate. So actually, time in view and all the metrics that Jordan mentioned, they're not really looking at those, and quite often, actually, they're not even aware of them. So again, it comes back to client sophistication. And in Hong Kong, I think there's still quite some way to go. Whereas in other markets like Australia or even the US, where they're way more sophisticated, for sure they are looking at things like time in view and optimizing towards cost per time in view. But also Jordan mentioned there's like over 50 metrics, right? It can be a bit overwhelming, and what metric do you look at? What do you prioritize? Because you can't optimize towards everything, right? You have to kind of pick and choose your battles. So that's just something to be aware of.
Spoken like a true programmatic buyer, for sure. So great. We have one last question before we go to the audience, a few audience questions I think we'll have time for. So it did take some time for the industry to adopt and transact on viewability. Actually, that's still being adopted by the industry in APAC, right? So what are your thoughts on attention measurement as a future currency? We started talking about this a little bit, but Eileen, can you kick us off?
I mean, that would be a great way for us to actually shift the industry as well as, in terms of the sort of the next evolution as well. That's why Omnicom Media Group has been spending quite a lot of time in this space, at least globally as well. We've started piloting or testing some of these measurements in terms of how we could find a way to look at attention as a piece of measurement and a single currency as well, right? Especially in today's complex digital world, how do we then turn that into, I would say, a transactional measurement piece would be something that's really, really interesting as well. I think it is, if we kind of get there one day, it would be the industry's ticket to shift away from very heavy short-termism in where we are today on sort of cheapest cost, all down to sort of efficiencies conversation rather than effective conversation. And I think that would be really a way to kind of pivot ourselves as an industry to start having better conversations in terms of quality and cost in this space.
Yeah, Alexis, you started talking about cost per time in view. So what's your take here?
Personally, I think it's a great metric to look at. And I'd love to see it more widely adopted. And actually, some people are actually buying on a cost per time subconsciously without really realizing. So there's a large video platform where you're buying 6-second videos. I mean, you can back calculate what your cost per second is, right? Pretty easy to do. It's not super accurate, but you're doing it subconsciously, right? But what I want to see is kind of more integrations between all the platforms, all the DSPs, to enable us more efficiently and more automatically to kind of optimize towards those metrics.
Yeah, I think we all would love to see that. Jordan, on your side, can you speak to it from a DV perspective?
Yeah, I think attention is going to be the measurement currency for digital ads, period, right? I don't think there's any doubt about it. As digital becomes everywhere, think about, CTV, out of homes, wearables, attention is actually going to get more diluted. So whichever brand who can maximize attention with consumer will get to sell more products and services and, win the race.
And that's what advertising is here for at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So we're a little bit short on time, but I think we have time for maybe one or two audience questions. We had a few in the Q&A panel come in here. There was one question on why we think viewability is increasing year over year. And I will take a quick stab at answering that, but anyone else who wants to jump in, please. So a few things, right? There's obviously been an increased focus on viewability across the whole industry, and it's really become table stakes, meaning it's expected, it is in guarantees from a trading perspective for a lot of the agencies partners. And it's just kind of expected to have at least a certain benchmark. As Alexis was saying, you know, maybe it's not every single placement or every single campaign, but overall, you know, I think the expectation across many advertisers is that that's going to be, you know, there's a level at which they expect their campaigns to perform. And because of that, a lot of apps, a lot of publishers have actually, you know, adopted to this and have made their sites and apps more viewable towards that IAB standard definition, right? Of for display, for example, 50% of the ad in view for at least 1 second. So they're really adapting to that specific standard, which is why, you know, sometimes we see that the highest volume sites that we, you know, have, and there's an interesting part of this in our Global Insights report, so please read it. I don't have time to go into all of it, but we do see that some of those high volume sites that have really strong viewability, when you go under the cover a little bit, their attention metrics are just not as strong, right? They're really performing mediocre when it comes to attention. So I think that's, you know, part of the reason why we're seeing viewability increasing. It's not really the whole story, right? Yeah, Alexis or Eileen, if either of you want to comment on this, there's a question from the audience on what's the ideal percentage from a media spend that should go to a third-party tool like verification, like DV?
I mean, this is a pricing question, but actually, like I mentioned earlier, fraud protection on a lot of the platforms we use is included for free. It's just an opt-in. So, you know, there's no reason not to use it. Even if there is a cost, it's normally pretty minimal. So if I can't remember the exact costs that we run at, but you know, I would say it's sub 5%, way lower than 5% of your total cost would be for verification tools.
I think for me, you know, it's a great question, but I think, you know, in kind of introspecting on the question is, I don't think we should be asking what is the percentage of the media spend should go into verification tools, right? I think the reality is, if as a marketer today, digital is going to be that platform, you know, and I'm using the word digital because the reality is there's so many platforms, so many devices, so many available inventories out there. And we know for a fact that this is not going to go away. Digital transformation is inevitable. And if we're doing that in this space and we're advancing our digital marketing, then I think there shouldn't be a question of whether we should spend, be it 5% or 1%. The reality is you want to ensure that your digital marketing is more effective. It is delivering the results that we need to. And as part of it, we do have to deal with, in an open ecosystem, there are going to be fraud. There are going to be, you know, less viewable inventories. There will be brand safety issues because it's a user-generated ecosystem. So if that's where we need to, and we need to protect our brands, then I think the question should be, you know, across all my entire digital marketing efforts, as much as we put into the investment of building a strong CX on our platform, or whether we're spending money on putting productions in creatives, I think the same level of attention needs to go into how do we protect our brands better. So that, I think I would kind of answer it that way, not so much in terms of percentage, but I think just introspecting to see how important digital marketing is in your marketing ecosystem. And if it's important, then I think ad verification should be there.
Yeah, and you know, by applying verification and fraud protection, you're actually reducing the wastage of your media campaigns, exactly, increasing the quality of your media campaigns and the, you know, the inventory you're running on. So to me, it's a no-brainer, right? You should be using it.
Yep. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, Eileen, for the perspective. Yeah, just from my experience as well, every single time when clients ask us that question, like we've been able to provide strong, ROI in terms of, media investment, right? So by applying, ad verification, you're basically, saving a lot of media investment dollars in terms of avoidance and, brand protection. So, like I said, the technology investment pays for itself, multiple folds.
Yeah, we hear that from clients time and time again.
And I think the important part is sort of, if you haven't started, right, then do an A/B test, right, and see the impact to the brand, right, whether it is, be it with a short-term or long-term measurement, but even within short-term as well, if you would just kind of look at saying, hey, we're going to ensure that the viewability rate starts to improve, then what is the brand impact on that, and kind of do that test.
Yeah, and if you're interested in one of those tests, you can email sales@doubleverify.com. I'll say that for you, Jordan. All right, we are over on time. Huge thanks to Eileen and Alexis and Jordan, of course, for a fantastic discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else did. If you have not read our Global Insights report yet, you can download it from our site. There's a lot more benchmarks, trends, insights that are contained in there, including market level benchmarks for APAC. So highly recommend that you download that and take a look at it. And then this session is also being recorded. So if you want to view it at a later date or share it with a colleague, you absolutely can. And we would love for you to do that. All right. Thanks again to our panelists, and everyone have a great day.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.